and welcome to Novis, or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Amanda, and on this channel we talk about anything and everything strange. My first two videos were true crime related, however this week I figured we could take a break from murder and discuss some weird history and the modern day conjecture that it has led to. Very quickly, I'd like to apologize for missing last week's upload. Between the extensive research required for this topic, as well as me getting sick with COVID again, I just could not get the video out as fast as I wish I could have, so thank you for your patience and understanding. If you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, share with whoever you think might find it interesting, and let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you have any suggestions or requests for future videos, please put them in the comments as well, or fill out the suggestion form, which is linked in the description box. Also in the description box, you will find links to my socials, my Patreon, and the various sources I used to research this topic. I'm not going to add a warning to this video as nothing explicit is discussed, however I will be discussing colonization, slavery, and religion, so if any of that is going to trigger you in some way, please proceed with caution. I understand that these topics can bring up some strong opinions and beliefs, and I would love to hear what you have to say about the topic. However, please remember that everybody is entitled to their own personal beliefs and opinions, so please be kind and courteous in the comments. Rich discourse is encouraged, but bullying, name-calling, and disrespect will not be tolerated, so please proceed accordingly. Without any further ado, let's get right into the video. I watch or listen to probably 8 to 10 hours of documentaries on average per day, and I've been doing this for at least 5 years, but probably closer to 10 because I remember doing it when I was in high school as well. Rather than listen to music while I go about my day, I always have videos playing in the background. Even while writing this, I currently have a documentary about a plane crash playing in my ear. I mention this just to say that I'm sure that I heard about today's topic in a video at some point. However, I cannot remember when or by who for the life of me, or I would share that with you. With that said, let's set the scene for today's topic. The islands in the Pacific can be separated into 3 broad and distinct regions. One of these regions, called Melanesia, runs in an arc around the northeast border of Australia, stretching between New Guinea in the west and Tonga in the east. The inhabitants of the Melanesian islands are distinct among other Pacific Islanders as they generally have much darker skin and distinctly African features. The distinction between Melanesians and other Pacific Islanders was made in 1832 by the French explorer Dumont d'Urville. The explorer was extremely observant and very creative with his classification names. Melanesia is derived from the Greek words for black and island, making the word Melanesia literally mean islands of black people. Current studies suggest that 2 main migrations out of Africa are responsible for the settling of Asia and the Pacific Islands. The first left East Africa around 120,000 years ago, only about 180,000 years after the first evidence of modern humans was left on the continent. I know this seems like a long time, but to put this in perspective, modern humans have only existed for approximately 0.007% of Earth's entire lifespan. The first explorers who lived on the eastern coast of Africa traveled north along the shoreline, eventually reaching the south coast of Asia, before turning back south and following the coast into the Melanesian Islands and onto Australia around 50,000 years ago. These ancient people are the direct ancestors of native Aboriginal peoples of these regions. The second stayed inland, heading north and then east into the Asian continent. Over the millennia, the second wave spread across the continent until approximately 5,000 years ago, when some of those people living on the southeastern coast of China once again headed into the Pacific. These explorers make up the majority of the ancestors for modern-day Micronesia and Polynesian peoples. This is why they tend to look more typically Asian than their Melanesian neighbors. The small-scale Melanesian civilizations flourished on these abundant islands as they were inhabited by swaths of seabirds, various flora, and were surrounded by vibrant coral reefs brimming with fish. There were no strong leadership roles within these communities. Instead, they were clans bound largely by familial ties, with the elder males of the family usually being the chief. Complex routes for trade and exchange existed between the islands, requiring long-distance voyages on wooden canoes. Voyagers relied on the positions of the stars and other natural migration patterns, such as those as birds, to navigate the open seas. The warriors from these islands are said to have been fierce, sometimes participating in human sacrifice and even cannibalism. These islands remained untainted by the Europeans until they discovered the islands in the late 16th century. However, sustained contact did not occur until the mid-19th century, when Britain, the Netherlands, Australia, Germany, and Japan each laid claim to the islands in this region. This occupation by white Europeans and the Japanese no doubt altered the course of history for the Melanesian people. Up until this point, Melanesian religion was based heavily on the past and the familial ancestors of the villagers. The Melanesian islands are the most linguistically and religiously diverse in the world, making up nearly 25% of all languages and religions on the planet. However, some generalizations can be made. None of the Melanesian cultures developed a writing system before interactions with Europeans. Their histories, myths, and religious beliefs were passed down by oral tradition alone. Using prayer and sacrifice, those who acted as the religious leaders, known as magicians, would mediate between the average citizen and the invisible entities and forces, such as ancestral spirits, who controlled certain outcomes in daily life, such as success or failure, prosperity or disaster, and health or death. Many of the cultures also believed that an original pair of humans sprung from the mud and they procreated to make the human race. As the predominantly white colonizers moved into the region, they began blackbirding, or enslaving by force or coercion, the Melanesian islanders and sending them to the cotton and sugar plantations in Australia, as well as those on the Fiji and Samoan islands to work as laborers. These slaves were known collectively as Kanakas or persons in Hawaiian. This practice continued until the Australian government called for the abolishment of recruitment in 1904 and the subsequent deportation of most Pacific Islanders by 1906. Both on the plantations and back in the villages, Christian missionaries began trying to spread their religious beliefs. Because these white newcomers and their technologies were too advanced to have been created by man, the islanders believed that they must have a connection to the higher power in the universe. Because of this, many islanders devoted themselves to the Christian movement, even becoming missionaries themselves. The spread of Christianity was slow though. For obvious reasons, villages located along the coasts of islands or on islands with less dense vegetation were the easiest to access, and so they became the first to be converted in the mid to late 1800s. Other villages, such as those in the highlands of New Guinea, remained free from contact from the outside world until as late as the 1950s and 60s. Today, some villages are still so remote and difficult to get to that they've had very little interaction with the outside world at all. Even so, as much as 90% of all Pacific Islanders today adhere to some variation of Christianity, depending on where the missionaries to that region originated and how the Christian beliefs were mixed with the local native religions that existed previously. So this is where things get strange and unquestionably unique. Some of these variants of Christianity morphed into something that on the surface seems absolutely bizarre and does not seem to reflect our general idea about what Christianity is or how it's practiced. However, bear with me through some strangeness, and I promise it'll come together in the end. As foreign occupation continued and Christianity mixed with traditional beliefs, many native religious leaders began to reject their colonizers. Some outright rejected Christianity and reverted back to the beliefs similar to that of their ancestors. However, for some, the perception of the white man changed. Rather than being seen as God-like themselves, the white man rather was seen as the returning of the Melanesian ancestors as light-skinned ghosts or spirits, who were bringing the tribal people's goods or cargo in response to the prayers and rituals of the villagers. The belief that foreigners were in fact ancestors returning increased when hundreds of thousands of United States soldiers flooded into the Pacific during both the First and Second World Wars. For the first time, the Black Islanders of African descent saw other African people in the form of US military personnel enjoying the advantages and the benefits of the white man's technology. A resentment began to build among Melanesian islanders because of how inferior their old ways were in comparison to that of the white man. They saw it as unfair that the white foreigners had such technologies, and that the ancestors who influenced the everyday life of islanders had not brought them the same knowledge and opportunities. The first reported movement of this kind in the region occurred in the Papuan Gulf and was at its peak between 1919 and 1922, although some people continued holding these beliefs into the later 1920s and early 30s. This movement was called Vailala Madness and was based on the belief that the ancestors were withholding European material goods from the islanders. The elders and leaders of the movement began having trance-like visions that the ancestors would be arriving soon. They would be aboard a European steamboat packed full of all the modern-day amenities the villagers could ever need. However, before the ancestors would come, the villagers had to prepare by adhering to strict moral and societal codes. Sacred traditional objects were destroyed, gardens were abandoned, and livestock was slaughtered en masse. Villagers adhered to various Christian beliefs such as relaxation on Sunday, changes to cleanliness practices, and rejection of traditional personal adornments like crowns, jewelry, and traditional clothing. As you might imagine, the ancestors and their steamer of goods never came, and the movement eventually fizzled out. However, this first occurrence would be followed by decades of other so-called cargo cults popping up throughout the Melanesian islands. One of the most famous of these cargo cults originated in the Melanesian archipelago of the New Hebrides in the mid-1900s under joint British and French control. Now independent and called Vanuatu, meaning our land forever, this country of 80 islands is where the hit show Survivor was filmed and is home to a 212 square mile volcanic island known as Tana. A few miles from Yasser, the sacred volcano caldera on Tana, a village called La Maraca in Sulphur Bay, lay not far from the water on the eastern side of the island. Minor specific details of the story vary depending on who's telling it, but I will give you the story told to journalist and foreign correspondent Paul Raffaele by former movement leader Chief Isaac Wan during his visit to the village in the early 2000s. Chief Wan would remain the head of the movement until his death in November of 2021. According to him, during the late 1930s, a strapping young white man appeared to the male village elders after they had drunk their nightly traditional beverage called kava to convene with the spirit world. Kava is made from the root of a pepper plant found throughout the Pacific and is known to produce mild sedation in consumers. Though it's not a narcotic, there have been regulatory controls placed on the substance in many countries due to the risk of liver toxicity. While in this somewhat intoxicated state, the elders claimed that a white man appeared to them and told them that they should resist the white man's ways. They were told to throw away the European currency and clothing, withdraw their children from European schools, and stop attending European churches. They should go back to the customs of their ancestors, including continuing to drink kava, which the foreigners had tried to stop, worshipping the magic stones of the magicians, and performing their traditional rituals and dances. Under direction from the elders, this is exactly what the people of Tana did. Villagers dumped their paper money in the sea, and they slaughtered their entire herd of pigs to prepare for a feast to celebrate with their new messiah. Movement leaders would be arrested in 1941 by colonial authorities, who feared what trouble the movement could create for them. However, this only strengthened the movement as these leaders were seen as martyrs for the cause. 1 year later, thousands of U.S. Army men would flood the region by air and sea to fight World War II in the Pacific. These military men built bases throughout the New Hebrides, which consisted of hospitals, airstrips, roads, bridges, and metal huts. Thousands of local men were recruited to help the soldiers build these things. They were paid 25 cents per day for their work and enjoyed many modern treats that the Americans had brought with them, such as chocolate, Coca-Cola, and cigarettes. The villagers were amazed by the seemingly endless supply of goods and wealth that the Americans had access to. When the villagers saw the seamen from the United States Navy, the story shifted a little bit. Elders claimed that when this man came to them, he was dressed all in white like an American sailor. According to them, his name was John Froome, and he remained with them throughout the war. It is theorized that the name either comes from the soldiers introducing themselves as John from insert location, or because Froom is the Tenese pronunciation of broom, symbolizing the native people sweeping the white colonizers and their influence from their island. After the war was over, American soldiers began leaving the Pacific. The elders claim that this is when John Froom told them that he would return to the island with boats and planes full of goods like those the villagers had seen on the bases. After hearing of this new cult belief, the US military sent Major Samuel Patton back to the island to try and explain to the leaders that the United States was in no way affiliated with this mysterious John Froom, and that they would not be sending goods to the villagers. However, he failed to convince them of this. The belief that the US supply was endless only deepened when the US military trashed tons of surplus war equipment off the coast. We are talking about aircraft, boats, jeeps, food, etc. The locals came to call this location in the sea $1 Million Point. After returning to their villages, locals were convinced that John Froom would soon join them with the cargo as well as with their ancestors who had entered the spirit world. With the cargo and the ancestors, John Froom would help the natives return to custom, or the way of the native people before colonization. They hacked makeshift airstrips into the jungle and built bamboo control towers strung with rope to guide the planes as they landed. The chief wore what looked like the uniform of a high-ranking US military man, and the other men in the village wore military soldier uniforms. February 15th would become known as John Froom Day, as it was the day it was said he promised to return. This holiday is celebrated yearly. Men known as the Tana Army march in rows holding rifles carved from bamboo with sharp tips painted red to look like bloody bayonets. They have USA painted in red on their bare chests and backs, and they dance traditional dances and sing hymns to John Froom. They also raise a large American flag up a bamboo flagpole. All of this is in preparation for the return of their messiah, John Froom. In the local languages, Yasur, the name of the holy volcano, means God, and locals believe that the spirit of the American soldier John Froom comes from deep within it after traveling under the sea from America. Climbing the volcano is considered taboo, and only holy men may summit it. In the early days of the movement, violators were severely punished. However, this is not enforced anymore. Still, believers do not dare climb to the top. The prophet Fred is the leader of another village on the island called Ipikil. In 1999, Chief Juan and the prophet Fred split ways after Fred had a vision from God while out to sea fishing. He warned that a local lake would breach its dam and flood a village on its way to the sea. The villagers heeded Fred's warning, moving to other parts of the island. Amazingly, 6 months later, the dam did burst, and the now vacant village was wiped away. When Fred left, he took hundreds of John Froom followers with him and created an offshoot of this new religion. In Fred's version, foreign flags and uniforms are not allowed, and they do not talk of cargo. John Froom is but a figurehead in this version of the religion, who is called Jesus John by Fred. It's even been said that Fred has performed miracles such as bringing people back from the dead. Believers are so confident in their differing versions of the story that a fierce rivalry broke out between the groups. At one point, nearly 400 men from both sides attacked each other with axes, bows and arrows, and slingshots. Thatched churches were burnt to the ground, as well as many houses. 25 of these men were severely injured during this fight, and many more have scars from the battle. Still, both groups worship their strange American deity, John Froom. There's another cult on Tana that worships a different god called Tom Navy, and even one that worships Britain's own Prince Philip after he and the Queen visited years ago. Recently, Prince Charles went back to see this village, and it's believed that he will likely become their new messiah since Philip has passed away. Paul Rafali spoke to Chief Juan about his visit to America in 1995. Chief Juan said that he was sad to see so many Americans, white and black, living in poverty, despite being in such a wealthy country. He stated that America was plagued by guns, drugs, and pollution. He stated, "Americans never show smiling faces, and so it seems they always think that death is never far away." He would add that he happily returned to Sulphur Bay. When asked what Chief Juan wanted John Frum to bring his village the most, he humbly stated, "A 25 horsepower outboard motor for the village boat. Then we can catch much fish in the sea and sell them in the market so that my people can have a better life." Finally, when asked why he and his believers still worship John Frum after 60 years without any sign of cargo that they were promised, Chief Juan stated, "You Christians have been waiting 2,000 years for Jesus to return to Earth, and you haven't given up hope." To this day, many people on Tana worship the mysterious spirit of John Frum in hopes that one day their Messiah will bring the faithful the goods that they were promised nearly a century ago. This story has been hard to research as so many variations exist depending on who is telling it. However, I've done my best to explain the basic ideas as well as give some more specific details as examples of what a cargo cult is. I want to add that anthropologists have since moved away from using the term cargo cult, as it's a huge generalization and it also represents the story of the native Melanesian people from the point of view of the colonizers. Therefore, it does not do the unique cultures justice for what they really are. Many anthropologists have said that they believe the emergence of this new religion closely mirrors how other more mainstream religions came to be millennia ago. This story seems really strange on the surface, but it reminds me a lot of other movements that have started and flourished in the distant past. I mentioned in a previous video that I grew up in the Baptist church, however I no longer participate in any type of organized religion. That said, I find theology very interesting and have spent a lot of time learning about the histories of many religions, including Judaism, and how Abrahamic religions came to be. Let me give you a brief history in case you're not aware. I'm also going to compare some parts of Judaism and how it came to be to cargo cults here. However, I want to stress that I am not saying in any way that Judaism is the same thing, just the way that it came about has some similarities, and I kind of want to talk about that. As with cultures around the world, small groups of native hunter-gatherers began settling in the region of current-day Israel as they found fertile lands of abundance. This area is referred to as a land flowing with milk and honey. Generally, these small groups were extended families that traveled together. Small villages who farmed their food rather than hunt it began to take shape, and the use of stone and wood tools slowly gave way to bronze. Spiritual and cultural beliefs began to form, but as with the Melanesian civilizations, each village had slightly different beliefs and cultures compared to other villages that surrounded them. Eventually, the nation of Canaan came to be, but even then, many gods and supernatural powers were worshipped, including the creator of earth and mankind, the fertility and femininity goddess, the god of thunderstorms, and the god of the sun. Many other deities and powers existed to worship other aspects of the natural world as well. At this time, the Canaanites also lacked a writing system, and like the Melanesians, their history and beliefs were passed down orally. Eventually, this region would fall under Egyptian control. Egyptians enslaved the Canaanites and forced them to work in mines and in building the many pyramids that still stand today. Under Egyptian rule, the Canaanites absorbed many cultural aspects from the Egyptians. They learned and used their hieroglyphs that would eventually turn into the first written alphabet. They worshipped new gods, and they developed new traditions. Similarly, occupation and enslavement by the Europeans greatly changed all aspects of Melanesian culture. Eventually, the Canaanites grew tired of the oppression. A prophet named Moses would climb Mount Sinai, where he saw God appear in a burning bush. He was given the 10 Commandments from God and told to lead the Canaanites out of Egypt. Mount Sinai is also where Moses would later receive the Torah and where he was told about how God created the earth and that humanity came from a single pair of humans that God created himself in his image. In all Abrahamic religions, it is said that the prophet Moses spoke directly to God in a divine phenomena. However, recent studies have suggested that specific plants that grew in the Sinai Peninsula are closely related to plants that grow in the Amazon and are commonly used to make the psychedelic beverage known as ayahuasca. Users of ayahuasca have reported hallucinations, as well as strong feelings of religious and spiritual enlightenment. It is believed that the plants on the Sinai Peninsula may have been used in a similar way, and these studies suggest that it is possible, and I want to stress possible, that the prophet Moses was actually just tripping while on Mount Sinai and thus hallucinated God speaking to him. In reality, we will likely never know for sure one way or the other. However, this once again greatly resembles the origin story from the John Frum movement, as its leaders were drinking high concentrations of kava and went up the holy mountain, aka Yasur, the mountain's volcano, when John appeared to them and told them they must go back to their old ways and get their people out of the control of their enslavers. Although the Melanesian leaders may not have physically led their people out of the region, you can argue that they too experienced a cultural and spiritual exodus. After exiting Egypt, the Jewish people are said to have entered into a marriage with God. They pledged loyalty to him, and he pledges devotion to the Jewish people. A yearly celebration of this bond is created. Known as Shavat, or oaths in Hebrew, this yearly celebration involves feasting, praying, as well as singing and dancing to traditional songs celebrating the relationship between God and the Jewish people and the reception of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Again, very similar to the celebrations witnessed on John Frum Day. Perhaps most interestingly is the split between Judaism and Christianity. This separation originated from the new belief that Jesus, a prophet who could perform miracles, was in fact the Son of God, the earthly personification of God himself in the flesh. However, many Jewish people did not believe that Jesus was the true prophet, thus the people who did believe became separated from traditional Judaism, and thus the religion of Christianity was born. New beliefs, traditions, and even holidays were formed. Now compare this to the split in the John Frum movement between Chief Juan's version of the religion, similar to Judaism in this example, and the Prophet Fred's version, who developed their own beliefs while maintaining the general framework of the original religion that they splintered from. All of this to say, I don't think the events that have transpired in Melanesia are actually all that unique. Although we may not understand these seemingly peculiar beliefs in the present-day world in which we live, it's extremely important to remember that the cultures that form these beliefs were abruptly confronted with and disturbed by another civilization that they did not identify with basically in any way. Like the Canaanites, the Melanesians had their lands, lives, spiritual beliefs, and political ideologies altered by a more highly advanced civilization. They were enslaved, deceived and misled, and forced to follow new rules and moral standards that were not compatible with their worldview. They would struggle to integrate their traditional beliefs with the new information being told to them by people from an obviously more advanced society. Because of this power imbalance, it's likely the less advanced society would believe whatever the more advanced society had told them. As such, superstitions and new beliefs are bound to occur as they try to understand a society that is completely foreign to them. Perhaps rather than watching an outlandish cult forming, we're actually just witnessing firsthand a phenomenon that has been happening for millennia. A natural result of humans trying to understand a world that makes little sense to them. The creation of new beliefs, traditions, myths, and spirituality. Who knows what the John Frum movement may look like in a few thousand years, should it persist as long as Abrahamic religions have. Well, this is the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed the topic. I find this whole series of events to be very interesting, and I really thought that the comparison between what we consider like mainstream religions to be very interesting, so I really wanted to share that with you. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are below. Once again, please like and subscribe if you want to. If not, that's fine as well. I appreciate you being here either way. Let me know what you would like to hear me discuss next, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. I'll see you next time. And just remember, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.